How do you and I have victory over criticism? Well, this past Sunday, Pastor Ray shared in his message entitled Victory Over Criticism, the reality to that answer is pleasing God. So when we think about that, what does it look like in our daily life? Check out today's sermon shorts to find out more from Pastor Ray on this thought. Today on Sermon Shorts, we want to talk back to this past Sunday on this message entitled Victory Over Criticism. And the reality, as you made clear to all of us, that we all will and have faced criticism. And in one of the messages in the second service, as we had our time together yesterday or on Sunday, you mentioned the reality of the answer being focusing on pleasing God compared to pleasing people. And I remember another sermon one day that you asked the question, what would our life be like if we were more focused on pleasing God versus pleasing people? So when we think of overcoming criticism and being victorious through that, how do we know we're truly pleasing God versus pleasing people?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And of course, as you stated, I ended the message really with that. The ultimate secret to victory over criticism is keeping your eyes on Jesus, staying focused on Him. Reminds me of what the writer of Hebrews said. He said, "Let us lay aside the weight that so easily entangles us and run with endurance the race that is set before us, keeping our eyes fixed upon Jesus." And Paul said in Corinthians, he said, you know, what I've learned to do is do what God has put me here to do. That's a loose translation. And he says, no man is my judge. He says, but God will judge me. And so his statement, by the way, to some critics, and that's what that was focused at, was simply, I've chosen to put my eyes on God, to keep my eyes on Him. What does that look like in our life? Well, it has to start with a couple things. First of all, it has to start with an understanding of what has God put me here to do.
That's good, yeah.
And if you get sidetracked from why has God created me and what is my purpose, then you'll start listening to every criticism, and it's hard because they can be loud.
Right.
And so we first have to begin with our purpose. God, I know what you've created me for.
Right.
I told a man recently, and it's not an original statement with me, but he and I were talking. I was with a group of pastors, large church pastors. We have a meeting each year.
Right.
And he and I are both kind of the senior guys now, which feels kind of weird. But we were talking one day during the session, and we're good friends, and he's out in West Texas. And he said, do you ever think about taking another path? Or I said, at this stage in my ministry, I can say what I've heard before, and that is, this is what I was designed for. And this is where God designed for me to be. And he said, exactly. He said, I feel the same way. And I said, so I'm not looking for this, or I'm not looking for that. My point in telling you that is, and I'm doing my best not to listen to things that would distract me from the purpose that God has created for me as a pastor, as a leader of our family. And that same is true in our personal lives. One of the ways the devil gets victory, and we're talking about overcoming so that we can live the victorious life.
Right.
But one of the ways that the devil gets victory is to get our focus off of Jesus and our ears on the critics. What does the critics say? What do they think about me? What are they? And if we're not careful, it's easy to do.
Right.
Because I've never met somebody that didn't want to be liked.
That's right.
Never met somebody that says, I love rejection, or I love people that criticize me. So it looks like razor focus. That's what it looks like. That when you talk to a person who has their eyes on Jesus, you'll know that the direction of their life is about, what does Jesus want me to do? Yeah. It doesn't mean they're immune to criticism or that it can't have an effect, but it means that, well, Paul said it, this one thing I do, I focus on what's ahead and not what's behind me. Paul had great critics, lots of them. And what he said is, I've learned to put my eyes on Jesus. He reminds us of that at the end of his life even, when he said, I fought the good fight, I've kept the faith, I've run the race. So that's a long way maybe a convoluted way of saying the thing that I believe we have to do is we have to keep our eyes focused on the mission God has given us and run that race, as Hebrews says, with our eyes fixed upon Jesus. A runner in a race loses, as you know, Chase, if they get distracted in turn. I won't ever forget in the Olympics many years ago, Carl Lewis, when he was at his peak, he lost to a guy whom later they determined had used performance-enhancing drugs, Ben Johnson. And he just barely lost. Carl Lewis was the fastest man on the planet at that time. And they went back, and he lost the 100 meters to Ben Johnson. And they went back, and they started analyzing what caused him to lose, being as fast as he was. And they found a part of the clip, where you can see him just a fraction, just kind of cock his head to see where Johnson was in the race.
Right.
And the pros all said that's what cost him the race,
right,
because he just gave enough attention to his competitor that it caused him not to keep his eyes focused enough across the finish line. Well, it's a beautiful illustration for us.
Right.
If we're not careful, when the critic starts doing their thing, we'll start glancing at the critic instead of keeping our eye on the finish line. So it looks like razor focused. It looks like I'm dialed in. And that, I believe, more than anything else, both illustrates that that we understand what we've been put here for, and it also illustrates that our desire is to please God. Ultimately, is to please God, and so we run kind of with a razor focus across the finish line.
What do you say, Pastor, as we wrap up today, to the person that doesn't have that focus or doesn't know that purpose that God's placed them here? How do you help somebody grasp that, and wrap us up quickly with that thought today?
Well, here's what they do. It gets back to the purpose thing. You got to discover why God put you here, that you're not here by accident. God put you here. He has a plan for you. And the place of greatest fulfillment is right smack dab in the middle of that plan and that purpose. So you got to help them understand you're not an accident, you're not a freak, you're not some kind of mistake. God created you. In fact, as Jeremiah said, before he was born, he was formed in the womb and set apart for the purpose of God. I think if a person understands that, it will help them keep their eyes on running toward that purpose or that mission, and keep them from being distracted, so to speak, from the critics that come their way.
Yeah, that's a great thought and a great encouragement for us all, Pastor. And this passage and this message was a challenge, and we want to encourage all those that are watching today to go back and listen if they didn't, and just thankful for these words as we think about being a victorious Christ follower in our world today. Razor focused on the purpose of God for our lives. That's the answer. To be focused on pleasing God. May that be the way we live our life each day as a victorious Christian.